Good afternoon. Today's webinar topic is discussing race and diversity initiatives in the workplace. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to go over a few housekeeping items. My name is Joanna Brown, and I am the webinar organizer for today. We want to make sure today's presentation is extremely valuable for you, so we ask that you submit all questions by clicking the question button in the control panel and typing your question. Our speakers today are Heather Steranka and Berlon Hamilton, and the Q&A will be moderated by Marco Gregorevich. So I'm going to give you a few notes around Heather and Berlon, and then the next person that you hear from will be Heather, followed by Berlon, and then Marco will bring both Heather and Berlon back on for a moderated question and answer period. Heather Steranka is a certified diversity professional with more than 15 years of management experience in both corporate and nonprofit organizations. Since 2015, she has been facilitating powerful conversations and dialogues about race, racism, and other challenging topics, working with large and small organizations in both nonprofit and corporate sectors. Groups can range in size from 6 individuals to up to 40 people. This year, she has continued to do this important work virtually due to COVID-19. Berlon Hamilton currently serves as the Director of Supplier Diversity at Cleveland Clinic. In this role, Berlon is responsible for promoting, driving, and executing supplier diversity inclusion across Cleveland Clinic's healthcare system. He has over 20 years of experience in procurement, business development, stakeholder management, and supplier diversity. And now we will begin showing Heather.
Great, thank you so much, Joanna. I'm so happy to be here and I'm excited for this work. It's important work, it's difficult to talk about, but that's why we're here today. So whenever you're ready, I'm ready. Okay. You can move to the next one. So I'm starting off with a little quiz. So if you want to put in the chat, what is your answer? Is race a biological factor or a social construct? Which group has the most genetic variation? Is it A, humans, B, chimpanzees, C, penguins, D, fruit flies, or E, elephants? Go ahead and put your answer in the chat. Is anything? I can't see anything in the chat, so. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, great, thank you. So I can't see the answers, but I'm hoping many of you said D, fruit flies. The reason is fruit flies have a short lifespan. There's tons of genetic mutations over millions of generations. Whereas humans, we are a relatively young species, and we have always moved and mixed and mated with each other. And we are one of the most genetically alike species on the planet. Next slide. We start with this because it is important to realize that race is a social fabrication or a construct, but it was created by us to classify people on this arbitrary basis of skin color and other physical features. And even though it doesn't have a genetic or scientific basis, the concept of race is important because it has been used to such detrimental effects in our country and around the world. Societies have used race to establish and justify the power, the privilege, the disenfranchisement of people, and oppression all over the world, and specifically here in the US. So, next slide. So even though it's a social contract, it is important, it matters to talk about, because this inequity exists and it continues to exist. It was created by us. It needs to be dismantled by us. We cannot ignore it. Go ahead to the next. And again, this racial worldview that we have created for ourselves was invented to assign people perpetual low status and others given access to privilege and power. And the tragedy that is the United States is that these policies and practices have been so successful in constructing these unequal populations. And we're seeing the results of that every day. Go ahead, next. Oh, one back. One of the things that's important to think about, why is this important to talk about? Talking about race and who needs to talk about it. From the work I've done and talking to friends of mine, African American, Black, people of color, what I have found, and this is borne out in research, that people of color are exhausted. Racism has effects on the mind, body, and spirit. It is physically draining, emotionally draining. And this can be historical trauma and current day trauma. Things are happening today. So these past and present trauma, it's exhausting. And what is explained to me as if when every time you look at the TV and there's another horrible story, what if that was your father? What if that looked like your father? What if that looked like your brother? And as a white person, I had to take a minute to get behind that, because for me it doesn't have the same impact. So to think about every day turning the TV on and seeing someone that looks like you or looks like someone you love being hurt, being killed, being mistreated. And as white people, we have an obligation to talk about this, because there's a really ethical problem in asking the people who have been traditionally oppressed to fix their oppressors. So asking the injured party to do the heavy lifting is not okay. Now, I'm white, and go ahead to the next slide. One of the issues that we have is, as white people, sometimes we're happy to say, I'm woke. It's not me that's the problem, it's someone else. And I'll check my privilege. But what I'm not doing, or what I need to make sure that I'm doing, is having difficult conversations with people in my circle, other white people that are problematic, that I'm looking at systems and policies. Just to say I'm okay isn't enough. We have to be reaching out and being checking the circle that we influence, the people that are in our circle. Next. So why do this at work? I mean, this sometimes can feel like this is not a work topic, but I will tell you, today, these social justice, racial equity are relevant issues for employees, customers, and in the communities where we work. We all want to have a workplace that's productive. We want to have workplaces that are open and welcoming, where people feel included and people can do their best work. Creating this space for these conversations, to be able to talk about race, to be able to talk about types of discrimination, other issues, it will help to identify where there might be some bias in policies that exist, creating this safe container for people to be their full selves at work. Whatever your DEI efforts, like my friend Berlin is going to talk about supplier diversity. If you are able to have open and honest conversations about race, your discussions then about supplier diversity are much more effective. Your discussions about recruiting, your actions around recruiting are much more effective. Having these kind of conversations can really positively affect the health and wellness of your employees. Stress we know it has real impact on the body, and it has real impact on the mind. It will help you increase your levels of employee engagement. And we know when employees are engaged, they do their best work, your retention rates go up, which will again help you become an employer of choice, which is what we all want to be. It impacts the bottom line. So it's not just a nice to talk about, it's a need to talk about. Next slide. Why should you, and to this I'm speaking to my white colleagues and my white people that look like me, why should we talk about race at work? and I've been here where I just don't know what to say. But I will tell you what I've learned is my silence is worse than saying the wrong thing. It's not okay to excuse myself from these conversations that are messy, that are tough, because it's these tough conversations that are going to bring about change. The fear of messing up shouldn't stop leaders from starting a conversation. Leaders have gone throughout their career making strategic risks, smart risks. This is another of those risks. If you're a leader, you can lean into the discomfort and take the risk. A messy conversation is better than silence. Next slide. When you think about this, one of the things that I do when I help organizations have these conversations is we talk about the difference between a safe space and a brave space. A safe space is good. Sometimes we need that, but it's not where a lot of learning will happen. Healing can happen, support can happen in safe spaces, but for our leaders, we want to see them encouraging brave space. We want to see them leaning into the difficult conversation. It's uncomfortable, sometimes it's messy, but that's where things happen. That's where change happens. Nothing is ever changed because it's working well. It's something is changed because it's messy and it's not working the right way. Go ahead to the next. So I want to encourage you, if you take nothing away from what I say, I want to encourage you to lean into that discomfort, because this is something we all learned as kids. When you fall forward, when you face forward, you know, when you don't fall forward and move backwards. So when you face forward, you move forward. The results will surprise you, and it gets easier with practice. So the more you talk about it, the more you are transparent, the more you are sensitive, the better you get. It's okay to be nervous, and discomfort is a part of life. No one said that life was going to be free of discomfort. Next slide. So there's a lot of ground rules that we can set. When I do this, there's a lot of different steps I go through to make sure that we've created a safe and brave space. Setting some ground rules, some conversation guidelines to make sure that if I'm going to have a conversation with a group, we've set some boundaries around that. Trying to control your emotions, meaning I'm a white woman. If I'm crying, that doesn't help. That does not help move the conversation forward. I need to, be professional, keep myself together, because I'm not helping anybody by getting overly emotional. Discuss, don't attack. If you disagree with someone, disagreement is fine, but discussing, not attacking their beliefs or their point of view. When you listen carefully, the goal is to be able to articulate back to that person what they said. So if you're really listening, you should be able to summarize what they said. Respect and empathy are key. Trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes, having respect, because respect should affirm both myself and the person I'm giving respect to. And these are things I'm not expecting you to have them right away. There are things, if you need help, there are many facilitators and resources here in the local Cleveland area that can help you develop these skills. Acknowledge that you understand why someone might hold an opinion that's different than yours. They may have a valid reason for why they believe the way they do, but understanding their opinion does not mean you agree with it. Try to show that you're open to listening to different opinions. It doesn't mean you have to change your worldview. And you don't have to agree with someone on every issue to work effectively with them. So I don't need you all to be on the same page with me of how I'm going to vote, of where I go to, where I worship, where I send my children to school. To agree, to be able, I don't need to agree on those things to be able to do the best work and be comfortable at work. Next. So here's just some general ideas for how to start a conversation. If you are, I'm speaking from the white person perspective, asking someone how they're doing, and we do that almost every day. How are you doing? Everything's good. But stopping, pausing, and saying, no, how are you really doing? Because sometimes people need that extra moment to really know you're going to listen. Just letting people know that you're here if they want to talk, that you're available. They may not want to talk at that moment, but letting them know that you're there, that you're thinking about it. If you don't understand, ask them to help. Well, how can you help me understand what's going on? And then when this happens, I'm wondering if what's going on. I'm curious. I appreciate your openness to talk to me. And understanding that if someone doesn't want to speak to you, just say, if now's not a good time, I'll check back with you in a few days, because people are at different places. It may not be a good time for us to listen to each other, so let's pause. If things do get heated, things do get unproductive, pause and come back later. The goal is not to convince somebody or to win them over to your side. Often the goal is to stay in connection, stay in conversation. Sometimes you may talk to someone and they want to send you an article to read, or they want to recommend something for you to take a look at, or a video or a podcast to give you some context. And you may want to, if something starts in a meeting and that's not the right place, move it and make a point to say, I want to have this conversation, but let's do it in a different place. Go ahead. Next. What happens when you make a mistake? I do this work for a living. I am a certified diversity professional. I have a degree in psychology, and I can still put my foot in my mouth. I can have the best intentions, and it will still come out wrong. So the goal is not to try to never make a mistake, because you will make a mistake. We're human. We're not perfect. So doing your work and preparing doesn't mean you'll never make a mistake. It means that when you do make a mistake, how you go from that mistake and what you learn, what you take from it, and how you perform better next time, that's what people are looking for. That's what they're going to remember. One more. And I want to finish with this. The only way that we're, as a society, are going to undo racism is to be able to identify it, to describe it, to talk about it, and then we can dismantle it. So if we can't talk about it, if we can't identify it, it's not going to go anywhere. So I hope this gives you some ideas, and being able to talk about it, as I said, will help with your D&I efforts, like my friend Berlon, who's going to talk about supplier diversity. Being open to have discussions makes that work go so much more smoothly. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Heather, for that. That's great information on how we can have the conversation within our organizations. What I'm going to show you today is just how we've taken that conversation and actually put it into action at the Cleveland Clinic. So give me a second and I'll be able to bring up my slides here, hopefully. So hopefully you can see my slides. Try. Well, I'll just start, and hopefully you can see my slides. But thanks, Heather, for the how do we have the discussion and how do we reduce racial disparities in our communities? And it's very important to us here at the Cleveland Clinic. So what I'm going to kind of cover today is, what we do internally to gain buy-in from our leaders in the organization to do the work of creating economic opportunity for people within our community. As we heard from Heather, racial disparities can be very consuming, and it can affect us in a lot of different ways. It can affect us based on our livability, how we're able to buy products and services. We look at it from how it's really affecting healthcare disparities. When you look at the pandemic that we're under today, looking at how it affects people of color even more so. And we realize and we believe it's because of the disparities of economic disparity in income. So how do we face that, and how do we address that as an anchor institution here in Cleveland? And then I'm going to also share with you strategies for strengthening supplier diversity program. If you would like to start these types of discussions and efforts in your own organization. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about what we buy. So just to give you an example, we typically buy about $3 billion in goods and services across our organization every year. That number is increasing and growing every year as we integrate new hospitals into our system. But typically that is broken up into construction, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and goods and services. You'll see on the next slide here is the allocation of that spend. You can see that the majority of that spend is in our clinical space, which is about 42%. 38% of that spend is in our non-clinical space, and about 20% of that spend resides in our buildings and property, our construction of our facilities. So we'll kind of go into talking about how do we do this work? How do we take that $3 billion and integrate that infusion of opportunities in the communities we serve? So it really starts with
Hey,
the
Berlon.
community. Yes, I'm sorry.
This is Joanna. I just wanted to let you know that if you can go into the slideshow presentation, because we see
Let me see. What about now?
that's good. Is that good
That's
for you?
better? Okay. So thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
it really starts with the policy. As you heard from the previous presenter, Heather, she mentioned that, you know, to do this work, you really have to be passionate about the work, but it also starts with policy. And I can say, in order to do this work, it really starts at the top and it trickles down to the people that takes the action. And at Cleveland Clinic, this is very important to the work that we do. Our CEO, all the way down to our senior leaders, really talk about the 4 cornerstones of care for the clinic. And you'll hear our CEO, Dr. Mahalovit, talk about the 4 cares of our pillars of 4 cares, really our patients, our caregivers, care for our community, and care for the organization. And the work that I do really focuses on the care for the community as well as the care for the organization. And we feel that you can't do one or the other. It has to be done cohesively and together. It really takes a village to do this work correctly. So I lean into this work when I'm going across to talk to other senior leaders, and I'm talking to people that are doing the actual contracting and buying products and services throughout the enterprise. I really lean into the policy that has been established all the way from our senior leader that starts with our CEO, Dr. Mahalovit, and say, this is very important to the organization, and how do I help you achieve that goal that we hold so dearly to our hearts? So it really starts about building a lifestyle of partnership, not only with the caregivers in the clinic, but a partnership with the community in which we serve. So I will kind of go into details about some of the initiatives and the projects that we're working on that make sure that we're involving the community in which we support. So that it really starts with the policy and the mission. So this is very critical work. You can't do this without it. So I want to start there first. Without the mission, without your leadership buy-in, this work becomes difficult to do. So I want to go into talking about some of the diverse outreach we do within the organization. I have a supplier diversity steering and advisory committee, and that committee is made up of senior leaders within the clinic, as well as leaders throughout the community in which we serve. So GCP is one of those committee members. So every quarter, we talk about the various initiatives and projects that are going on within the clinic, and we share that with the organizational leadership around the clinic. in our communities to talk about various projects that we're working on, talking about various opportunities, looking for suppliers that meet those opportunities and criteria that we're looking for in the community. And we look for our partners to help us find the right suppliers. So we don't do this work thinking that it's going to make sense in a vacuum. We involve the community to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our suppliers, we meet the needs of the community constituents, and we listen to our advisory council members to better understand, to make sure that the work that we're doing aligns to meet the needs of the people that we serve. So that's very important. We also partner with GCP to do an e-marketplace. The e-marketplace is a portal, a web portal that we post our various sourcing opportunities monthly on various projects that we engage in, and we leave those opportunities up we don't take them down, we leave them up because we feel that the best way to get suppliers involved is to share with them what the opportunities are and to better prepare them when the opportunities come their way. So we have that in place. We also leverage our GPOs. So a GPO is our group purchasing organization, and they help us not only to control costs and reduce costs out of our operation, but we're working very closely with them as well as other health systems that are a part of this GPO to find qualified, diverse suppliers that meet our needs, not only the clinic's needs, but the other healthcare partners that are a part of the Vizient network. We also partner with our other corporations in the Northeast Ohio area. We're doing some work right now with Eaton Corporation and Rockwell Corporation as well. So they have a very, the same need that we have to make sure that we're reducing disparity in our communities. For us, it's a healthcare disparity. For them, it's the economic disparity. But we partner with other corporate organizations in Northeast Ohio. We also have a mentor-protege program that we have enforced in our design and construction in our trades area. And this is an effort to prepare the diverse pipeline. We understand that many of the diverse suppliers in our community are small, and we do our effort to ramp them up to scale, to give them the needed opportunity to understand our business, to better partner with our tier 1 suppliers, which are vendors that we do business with direct that are non-diverse, and we do business with diverse suppliers direct as well. But we put this program together as a way of trying to build capacity and scale of local diverse suppliers that may not necessarily have the opportunity to work with us directly because they don't have the scale and capacity. Again, it's being intentional. It takes an intentional effort in order to do this work successfully. And then the next slide really talks about the network that we have. Not only do we have a network in the Northeast Ohio that we partner with local healthcare, local suppliers and corporations in Northeast Ohio, we take this network in our industry as well. So we are a part of the Healthcare Anchor Network, which is made up of 50 other healthcare organizations like the clinic all over the US that have a passion for this work. And we benchmark with these other organizations to learn best practices in this space. And we know that we face the same hurdles and roadblocks and barriers as it relates to doing this work. So we come together collectively as a network. We talk about the roadblocks that we have, and then we work collectively together to solve these disparities, not only at the clinic, but the disparities around the nation. And we know that in most cases, we share vendors with each other. So the same issues that I have with trying to get non-diverse suppliers to commit to this effort, they have. So collectively, we leverage our buying power and we go after these companies collectively to get them to do more, to hold them accountable. again, it takes a village to do the work correctly. And then the next slide, it really talks about our journey. So we've spent over $1.1 billion with diverse suppliers dating back to 2010. And you can see the volatility in this this curve, in this trend line. But that volatility is due to, in most cases, to our construction volatility. As we get more projects and as we build out, we have a tendency to do more with diverse suppliers because, again, if you go back to that bar chart, that pie chart that we talked about previously, you can see the allocation, the majority, about 20% or so of our spend goes to construction, and we are building that pipeline in construction. You'll see in 2020, we took a slight decline due to COVID and the reducing of spend based on the pandemic. And I'm sure we've all are experiencing that today. But not only is that an issue for us, and I'm sure many of you, we're taking this opportunity to figure out how do we expand, develop, train, and develop suppliers during this time. We know we're not spending a lot as an organization, but we're taking the next level to say, how do we prepare when the opportunity does open up in 2021, hopefully, or and beyond, we'll be able to leverage some of the training and development that we have in place today for those diverse suppliers to be successful with us in the future. Be it what I mentioned about our efforts in the mentor protege program, we're expanding those efforts now, looking at ways that we can expand that across the enterprise. This is a slide of our percentage, and it correlates directly to the previous slide when you look at the dollars that we spend, and we base this off of our total spend. So our total spend, as I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, we typically do about $3 billion in total spend, and that number is increasing. When we bring new hospitals into our system, that number is getting larger and larger. And our CEO has mentioned that by 2024, we're looking to double our capacity as it relates healthcare capacity in the number of patients that we see and treat. So we have a very aggressive target to continue to grow. So you'll see that $3 billion number continuing to climb and climb. And we're looking to grow our diverse base of suppliers with that as well. So refocusing on our commitments after COVID, and I mentioned, you saw in the previous slide the decline in spend, but we have some concerted efforts to grow that. So we're looking at ways and opportunities to be more inclusive, to be more intentional. We're looking at ways that we can drive that through leveraging expertise and education, increasing our focus on developing diverse suppliers, driving performance to specific objectives, and continuing to find opportunities for inclusion. So we're working with our leaders today to develop performance measures that we measure our leaders across our various categories. So when we look at that previous number, when we talk about the money that we spend with diverse suppliers at an aggregate level, at a corporate level, we're taking that now and we're looking at each functional category owner within the organization and developing, giving them a goal, saying this is your goal for your particular category of the organization. And I work with those category owners, those business owners, to find diverse suppliers for the opportunities that they may have in their respective categories. We're also looking at strategies for strengthening our supplier diversity efforts as well. So going to the next slide, we're talking about building an internal culture of inclusion. You mentioned when we talk about what Heather presented to us about having the discussion, having the conversation, we're having the internal discussion with our functional leaders. As I mentioned, it really starts at the top. when our CEO has made the commitment in the 4 cornerstones of care, and when we talk about care for the community, care for the organization, we understand that care for the community means helping to reduce healthcare disparities, helping to reduce economic disparities in the communities we serve. So taking that mission as an organization and building the culture internally with our various category leaders are very important. But in order to do this work, you have to, again, the CEO has to be on the front lines of this. We're looking at ways to increase set-aside opportunities to level the playing field. So when you talk about how do we reduce the disparities in opportunities, we're looking at ways that, not in addition to the mentor protege program that we have, where we're developing suppliers that may not necessarily have had the opportunity and would not get the opportunity if we didn't have these programs. Once they finish those particular mentor protege programs, we're finding an opportunity for them to engage us directly. It may not be an opportunity that encompasses the enterprise, but we're looking for opportunities that may be small, and we're carving those opportunities out, and we're only giving those opportunities to diverse suppliers to compete amongst themselves. We measure category performance. As I mentioned, we don't just look at the aggregate number and roll that aggregate number out to our category owners, because each category owner may be at different levels of the journey. We may have some category owners that may be doing quite well. We may have other category owners that are not doing as well. So we set measurable goals by category. And we also look at tier 2 opportunities. We know that many of our suppliers have great diversity training and development programs that some we're leveraging, some we're not. So we're looking at how do we leverage that more so we can get more, be more intentional about this work. Again, it takes a village, not only the village internal to the clinic and the resources that we have with our employees and our leaders. We look at this as an ecosystem. So what do our vendors have as a way of training and development? What are the opportunities they have? Maybe it may be a smaller opportunity. It may be providing a widget that goes into a final product that we use in our facilities. It could be clinical or non-clinical. And we do not limit to one diverse classification. For us, we look at all classifications of diversity. We look at women, we look at minorities, we look at LGBT vendors, LGBTQ vendors, we look at disabled vendors as well. So it's always good to be inclusive in this work. Advocating for change. We mentioned we engage our community leaders. We don't do this work in a vacuum. We don't do this work thinking that we have all the answers. We have to involve our community leaders to make sure this work resonates to the people that we serve. And we listen to make sure that the programs and the opportunities that we share make sense to the people in our communities. We look for, we do a scan of the market. We want to know how many vendors in our community provide marketing service, how many vendors in our community provides IT services or janitorial services. So we take a landscape of the vendors in our community and we find opportunities for those vendors through the set aside initiative that I mentioned, or through our second tier initiatives, or through our training and development activity. And then we also advocate for inclusion at the industry level. Impact on our diverse suppliers. So we feel that the initiatives that I highlighted here will make a dramatic impact. It will help grow diverse suppliers in our community. It will create more of a networking opportunity for them to not only learn from us, but through the network that we've assembled through other healthcare providers and other corporations that we partner with to do this work. So people do business with vendors that they know and the vendors that they build a relationship with. So we feel that the things that we've developed internally will help broker those opportunities for networking for diverse suppliers. And these networking opportunities probably wouldn't be realized if these vendors would try to do it on their own. So we understand the role that we play as an anchor institution, and we try to make a difference and an impact. Don't shy away from providing feedback. So we continuously provide feedback to diverse businesses. If you are a vendor that's trying to do business with us and you take the time to go through the bidding process and you're not successful, we're going to provide you with a debriefing to provide you with that feedback. In addition to providing you with that feedback, we're canvassing the market to figure out how do we get you that what you're missing, that missing piece. Is it through partnering you up with one of our tier 1 vendors? Is it through helping you with set aside opportunities so you can be more successful? Maybe it's a smaller opportunity. We grow you and expand you. And we've seen vendors that start from a second tier relationship with us and a mentor protege relationship to becoming having a set aside opportunity to now expanding to developing opportunities to support us throughout our enterprise. And we also support the diverse certification process as well. We encourage our vendors to become certified diverse businesses. We only count third-party certified vendors. We work with the various organizations, again, through our advocacy, Supplier Diversity Advocacy organizations that we support, and we encourage them to become certified. So I'm going to draw it to a close. I'm going to wrap up by giving you my contact information here as a way of getting in touch with me. If you have any further questions, my email address, my number is there. If you are interested in doing work with us, there's our website. Please, we encourage you to register with us, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Berlon, and thank you, Heather, for your presentations. Berlon, as a follow-up, we did have some questions come up here for you. The first one being, could you describe an unexpected or new best practice that the clinic has learned from the healthcare anchor network? And perhaps there's a lesson for other larger companies in that.
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson that we learn is how do we work together collectively? I've gone to these network meetings, and for me, what I've learned, many of us have the same bottlenecks. Many of the vendors that we share, we're getting the same feedback from those vendors that they're not, one, not able to support us, or two, they don't have the bandwidth. Three, why are you the only institution that's requiring this? So when we come together and we formulate a network, we reduce a lot of the questions that may come up, that may arise from those vendors to say, hey, why are you the only one? No, we're not the only one. It's a network of us, and we're all trying to figure out how do we reduce healthcare disparities, and how do we create economic opportunities in the communities that we serve. And if you want to continue to be a vendor of ours, and they're looking at this massive list, and they're saying, well, hey, it's not just the clinic, it's 49 other healthcare systems with the same passion for this work, then they start, it's not going away. We have to be more intentional. We have to solve this problem. So that's really what we really learned from this healthcare anchor network. I would say to anyone, this work is something that you can't do on your own, no matter how large of your institution may be. It's always good to benchmark and leverage others in your industry group to make a more of an impact.
Okay. Thank you, Berlon. I do want to go back to one of the original questions I wanted to ask this panel. And I guess, Heather, we can start with you. In terms of what are common misconceptions that we encounter when we have the discussion between the difference between equality and equity?
Well, equality, a lot of times we think if we just give everybody the same opportunities, if we just we give everybody the same chance, they'll all have an equal chance to be successful. But the problem is we're not starting from a level playing field. We know that there are disparities in health, we know there are disparities in wages, we know there are disparities in education, and that's the problem. Equity addresses that we need to bring everybody up to the same level and give them a shot. So we're in equity work, you're creating that level playing field. That's the difference that I see.
Berlin, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would echo that what Heather said. You know, we're taking more of an intentional approach on how do we level that. You know, and I mentioned some of the activities that we're doing at the clinic to make that more of a level playing field. We're looking at ways of being more intentional. We're looking at set aside initiatives. We're looking at mentor protege initiatives, all of trying to do what Heather mentioned to level the playing field, because we know that there is a huge learning curve, and how do we get that? Most organizations are risk adverse. They're not going to do anything that's going to put them in an overbearingly risky situation. So how do we reduce our risks, provide a level playing field where we can bring the vendors and our communities up to speed, reduce the learning curve, give them an opportunity to earn while they learn. So these learning opportunities are not unpaid. These opportunities are paid opportunities, you know, so they may not have the tier 1 position, but they're learning and they're getting paid as well. And we're trying to grow them over a period of time to get them to scale up to where we want to see them be. And again, relationships is critical. Once we get these vendors in at a mentor protege level, our leaders in the organization see them on the floor learning. They build these critical relationships with these vendors. They're going to get more opportunity as time goes. So again, I agree with Heather on that. We have to try to figure ways to be more intentional, and how do we level the playing field.
Well, I'm glad you used the word learning curve in terms of the education about race, and when we talk about the misconceptions of between equity and equality, I guess that leads me to the next question: is, are we missing the mark when we have these discussions about race in our organizations? Because if people are still not understanding the difference between equality and equity, and how it drives into our diversity initiatives, I'm just wondering, are we missing the mark?
In my experience, what organizations I've seen do is they'll talk up to a certain point, and they're afraid to, as Berlin said, they're risk averse. They're afraid to take that next step, and so they'll talk up to a certain point, but they won't really go into where the messy stuff is, and I mean messy emotional stuff, because that's where you start to make change. That's where you start to touch people's hearts and touch people's minds. So my fear is that they're not going in enough. And that's where we need to kind of help. If a company or an organization needs a little bit of help, that's where bringing in somebody from the outside can help get you past that obstacle.
Berlin, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, you know, I would agree. You know, I think it starts with policy change. You know, when we look at the racial inequality that's going on in this nation now, and when you hear the protesters really expressing their frustration for what's been going on, and it's really about getting the decision makers in the room to change the policy. The reason why we've had such great success within the clinic, and we still have a ways to go. I'm not saying we're there yet, but it really starts with the policy, and it starts with our leadership. If your leader hasn't put a policy in place and a measurement in place to do this work, it's not going to get done. And that's the reason why I've had such success in what I'm doing at the clinic, because people within the organization know that Dr. Mihaljevic, our CEO, is asking me for a matrix every month. And when they know that it's being measured and it's being evaluated, then it's not that I'm asking them to do something that is not a part of the core values of the organization. They know it's a part of their performance reviews annually and quarterly, and everybody wants to do well. So I think it starts there. You have to be intentional about this work. I've been at other organizations that I didn't necessarily have the commitment at the C-suite, and it was just me trying to get the work done, and they felt like they were just doing me a personal favor, and it was just like, well, Berlon, if there are conflicting priorities, but the organization must support this work. It shouldn't be a conflicting priority. It has to be all-inclusive. Cases have been studied, and it's known that those organizations that embrace diversity have a diversity of mindset, and they have a tendency to do well in the performance category, in the performance arena. And that's the message that needs to resonate within organizations.
Well, I'm glad you bring up the buy-in from leadership and the C-suite level. I guess the follow-up on that thought, why doesn't conversation at the top in terms of race as it translates, why doesn't it always translate into an effective diversity initiative? I mean, you obviously mentioned you have the buy-in from your CEO, but I mean, there's obviously, whether it's especially in the larger organizations, sometimes that doesn't translate and the message doesn't kind of filter down to all levels, right? So how do you overcome that particular barrier or challenge?
Well, for me, it's training. It's training and educating our leaders. I think, when I first came on board to the organization, I've been with the organization now for about 3.5 years. We've always had a goal around this work, and it's been at the aggregate level, right? And when I would get in the room and I would talk about this is the right thing to do, and we would talk about our goals, everyone would shake their head like, yes, 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 we're on board. But it wasn't until we started breaking down that aggregate number, looking at each functional category leader within the organization and bringing to their attention what their contribution has been to this work. Then their eyes were open, and it was like, wow, this is where the organization is. This is where I am. How do we change that? How do we do more in my category space in what I own? Because no one wants to be called out for not doing this work. So I think it's about educating the stakeholders. It's about educating the vendors where the opportunities are. It's about saying, hey, this is what you own. These are the opportunities in your area. Maybe, again, organizations are risk adverse. Maybe they may not have had much success because they have a tendency to go with much larger vendors, and it's not a lot of diverse suppliers in that space. So they say, well, hey, it doesn't apply to me, because I typically work with the pharmaceutical giants, and I'm not working with the smaller guys. But then again, those pharmaceutical giants and those vendors that they work with have diversity initiatives, have training and development initiatives. They have second tier initiatives. Why aren't we leveraging that? And when you bring that to the organization and you bring that to the leaders, they say, well, yeah, we can do this. I don't mind using my influence to go across to my vendors and say, hey, work with Berlon and let's get more diversity at the second tier level. I want you to do more training and development of our diverse suppliers. So I really think it's about educating, and you have to know how to I guess tie everything together, cross your T's, dot your I's, and make it more of a holistic approach, because there's something that can be done for every organization. You just have to assess where you are, look at what can be done, and start small and work your way up. But I never look at it as being an excuse to say, hey, it can't be done. It may not be able to be done at the level that you would like for it to be today or tomorrow, but there is still things, small nuggets that can take place today that can make a difference.
Great, thank you. What about you, Heather? Your thoughts?
I think exactly what Berlin said, and timing, because a lot of times people want we want to see something measurable right away. And a lot of these conversations start off slow, but the benefits are they're so great when you get there, but it may take a little longer to get things moving. There's a hesitation are we going to put our effort into something that's going to take longer, or are we going to go for something that gives us a quick bump? And so the organizations that are willing to set aside some time, some resources to this, they're going to see the benefits in the long term. So others may see a short-term bump, but the ones who do the work are going to be healthier for the long term, and we're going to see them around a lot longer.
Great, thank you. I will throw in one question here that we have. How do you gauge and measure whether progress is being, or that an organization can say it's been successful with its diversity initiative? We could start with you, Heather.
Okay, there's a couple different ways. There's organizations will use an organizational assessment, employee engagement, and track their scores year over year. They can look at retention rates, especially retention rates by diverse, break it out by diverse groups. They can look at hiring practices, all of these things that are measurable. As Berlin said, if it's not measured, people aren't going to pay attention. So there's really a lot of ways that you can measure this. Supplier diversity is a great way to measure it, and it's very clear to people. But retention rates and hiring rates, all those things that you can break down by race.
Okay. Berlin.
Yeah, I would echo what Heather said. It's not a whole lot more you can add to that. It's measuring, it's constantly benchmarking with others, and leveraging your network.
Great. Well, thank you both for your presentations and for taking the time to answer some of our questions that we had today. Do you have any final thoughts or statements that you want to make on this topic? Heather?
Don't be afraid. Do the work. Educate yourself. There's a lot of information out there you can read. And like Berlin said, you can start small. Start with a podcast, start with an article, and build on it.
Great, Berlin.
And I would just leave and say it takes a village to do this work. It's not up to one person. Each and every one of us makes a difference.
Thank you both again for participating, and want to thank everybody who joined us today. So,
thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right, I believe that concludes our session. Thank you, everyone.